Hello community, I have a question just for you. What does Saints Row the Reboot, DMC Devil May Cry and Hitman Absolution all have in common? They're all reboots that damn near killed their franchise, except for Saints Row the Reboot, which succeeded in killing its franchise. Why is that, you may ask? Well, when you take a beloved franchise that hasn't been around in a few years and you bring it back by changing everything its fanbase loved about it to begin with, you tend to run into these types of issues. At first glance, Absolution looks like a normal Hitman game. Agent 47 looks pretty much the same, the story is supposedly canon from the previous games, so that hasn't changed either. But you see, while Saints Row and DMC rebooted their story from scratch, but tried to keep their gameplay intact, Hitman did the opposite, keeping the story and characters mostly intact, but altering the gameplay experience from scratch. Why would they do that? Well, let's find out. The year is 2006. IO has just released Hitman Blood Money, an exceptional game that has truly taken the best that the Hitman formula is able to offer on the current hardware of PlayStation 2 and Xbox 360. The game was an instant success. It becomes IO Interactive's best-selling game at the time and gathers overwhelmingly positive reviews from both critics and the players. This is IO Interactive's fourth consecutive Hitman game in a row, starting with Hitman Codename 47 in the year 2000, then Hitman 2 Silent Assassin in 2002, a remaster-style game in Hitman Contracts in 2004, before ultimately finishing the series off with Hitman Blood Money in 2006. After creating 4 Hitman games, each better than the other, IO Interactive had reached the peak of the Hitman formula at the time and decided to take a little bit of a detour. They wanted to mix things up and try different projects. First off, starting with Kane and Lynch Dead Men, releasing in 2007. It was a game entirely focused on pure violence and non-stop action. It received mixed reviews from both critics and players. Funny enough, the most memorable thing about it is gaming journalist Jeff Gertzman being fired due to giving the game the low rating of a 6 out of 10 on GameSpot.
It was this management team buckled basically when faced with having a lot of ad dollars walk out the door. Like we said at the top, like I got called into a room and basically said, you're terminated, effective immediately.
Still, some players really enjoyed the elements of this game while others didn't. Back in 2007, expectations for games were rather low, so it's difficult to judge it properly. It didn't light the world on fire, but it wasn't a complete disaster either. It was just good enough to receive a sequel in Kane and Lynch 2 Dog Days, which received mostly mixed reviews.
The final verdict for this game is below average. In fact, more than that. It's terrible. A 3 out of 10.
They also had another game, Mini Ninjas, which released in between, and although it had mostly good reviews, it was a game that was never gonna bring IO Interactive insane revenue or light the world on fire. Since the release of Hitman Blood Money in 2006, IO had not been able to successfully invent a new title that could carry them forward. Mini Ninjas was overwhelmingly reviewed well, but the scale of the project was far too small to have any meaningful long-term benefits, and with Kane and Lynch's sequel failing to make a real impact and suffering more negative reviews than positive ones, it meant they had to go back to their original sensation. As I like to say, this is the critical moment. IO has stumbled their way around looking for a successor to their Hitman titles, but after failing to do so, it was evident they had to go back to what was working to begin with. IO had not made a Hitman game in a long time. They had changed their engine, meaning they had to reinvent their formula. Though we don't have the exact time for Absolution's development cycle, with Blood Money releasing in 2006 and the first trailer for Absolution in 2011, it's very clear that the main build took place somewhere between 2007 and 2010. Now that timeline is extremely important because at that time single-player story-driven experiences were ruling the world. We're talking Batman Arkham Asylum, Max Payne, Gears of War, and Grand Theft Auto 4 just to name a few, with IO having to reinvent the Hitman formula from scratch. Because of their new engine, it meant there were two choices they could make. They could either focus on what made Blood Money so great and try their best to give their audience a worthy successor to it, or disregard their current player base and their previous successful formula to chase the current trend at the time, changing everything players loved about Hitman in order to get more of the casual player base. Which road do you think they went? Hitman fans and journalists alike didn't need to wait too long to find out, as Hitman Absolution debuted a demo in 2011, the reception of which was overwhelmingly negative. After almost 6 years without a new Hitman game, people expected a worthy successor. Instead, the game was completely linear in its design. Gone were the open environments that rewarded exploration, all replaced with linear progression. Targets were exclusive to only certain missions, meaning most of the game was just roaming from one point to the other without any reason behind it. And even worse, when targets were present, they were exclusively eliminated in cutscenes, meaning all of the freedom of approach had been replaced with cinematics. All of the things players had fallen in love with had been replaced and removed in an attempt to chase an already expiring trend. Does that sound familiar, Rocksteady? Anyways, the developers knew they had messed up big time, but their time was very small and they had already drifted way too far into the wrong direction. It was time for crunch.
Got a lot of heat for it's this doesn't feel like Hitman, it's too linear and action-packed. We did a lot, opened up a lot of locations, put in targets in there because there were no targets. We were only killing targets in cutscenes, not in the game, so it was a complete crunch. It was a bit of a monster to deal with to try to get Hitman back into Hitman.
IO had less than 2 years to revert the core design of the game, add new targets, change already existing ones, and open up the levels as much as possible. But the problem stays the same. When you've already built your foundation on sand, you can tinker with it all you like, but it's impossible to make it into a blockbuster success. At the end of the day, you can play around with chicken shit all you like, but it will never make a proper salad. Speaking of that, how bad was Absolution really? Well, in November 20th, 2012, the game released for the mass audience. Therefore, we can get in and find out just how different it was. The one thing that current players tend to admire about the new Hitman games is the world environment, an environment that exists without the need for Agent 47. NPCs all have their distinctive loops, filled with different activities. Whether Agent 47 is right next to them or on the other end of the map, doesn't matter. The world keeps turning, it keeps moving. What that means is, the player has to accommodate himself to it. He has to judge his actions based on those around him. The world is already created and exists in motion. It's up to him to find his way through it. In Hitman Absolution, it's the exact opposite. The world revolves entirely around Agent 47. Guards will constantly stand around and wait for him to approach in order for them to start a conversation and begin their loop. It is an extremely poor design choice, as now their loops become erratic because they start randomly. It's impossible to judge where guards can look at any given moment. It can mean that certain opportunities to isolate targets can become almost impossible to pull off if you get unlucky with their timing. Often these guards will be found at choke points of the maps, certain doors and corridors you need to pass through, meaning that now you have to wait for them to begin a conversation and begin the loop. It's an exceptionally bad design, given how often you will face it. Because of Absolution's lack of freedom of approach, it is a real problem. Now, some of you may say that also exists in the current trilogy, and although that is true, it's entirely limited to mission stories. and never found on choke points of the map. Instead, it's close enough to them in order to hear them, but not to get in your way. It's a big reason why Absolution can feel so chaotic, made even worse from the fact that maneuvering set maps is distinctively slower, as crouch running will get you spotted from ridiculous distances, and animations can feel abominably slow. Just hiding a body alone takes forever. It will get you spotted all the time, as guards' loops tend to be much quicker than the actual animation for hiding a body is, made even worse by subduing animations which are not only slow but also restrictive, as even if you were to use a wrench or any other prop you would think to be non-lethal, they would all result in a kill, leaving you with the bare hand subdue as your only option. You're no longer allowed to make manual saves. Instead, you have to save on certain checkpoints. That can be a problem in large areas where they're not present as often, or especially if you were to save at a bad time and then have to retrace your steps back. But that's nothing compared to the disguises. Disguises in this game rely entirely on instinct, which is something you will run out of extremely fast if used. Basically, every mercenary knows every other mercenary, every cop knows every other cop. Because of that, you have to hold your instinct button anytime you're near someone with the same uniform. If you run out, you basically have to do some action in order to replenish it, or just place your only, which is pretty much what I did. Honestly, when it comes to gameplay flaws, I can talk all day. There's simply far too many to fit into a singular video if you don't want to make it 10 hours long. But the biggest by mile has to be the design of the levels themselves. The majority of them are extremely linear, lacking freedom when it comes to their traversal. It feels more like a Batman Arkham game where you're just walking from point A to point B, except without the great combat and predator mechanics. There's an abundance of levels where all you do is run away from guards and cops hunting you down. Half the levels are basically that, having to get yourself from one point to the other with guards and mercenaries on your tail. It gets very tiresome very quickly. Also, many environments feel uninspired and generic, like they've been copied from the Activision Spider-Man games or Deadpool. It doesn't fit Hitman at all, and random targets with no story or reason don't either. Many levels you just go from one point to the other without actually doing anything of substance. There's no loadout options, meaning you'll be playing with the same pistol and fiber wire every level. That can get very frustrating, as at one point in the story, Agent 47 will no longer have his silver ballers. But even if you were to find a silenced pistol, you won't be able to bring it on you for future missions. However, it's not all bad. The story is certainly present. Whether you like it or not, it's up to personal preference. It's fully cinematic, with beautiful diverse cutscenes and environments featured in it, as well as excellent voice acting. It is a dark and gritty story, one that could never be done these days. Strippers being raped and murdered, orphanages being shot up by terrorists, bondage and sexy latex nuns and henchwomen. This game is filled with some fucked up shit. However, when it comes to the soundtrack, it is absolutely amazing. Hitman is known for having some awesome soundtracks, and this game is no exceptions. There are good things here, and I'll argue the game becomes 10 times more fun when you finish it and are able to select the good levels you like and try out different assassinations and infiltrations. My personal favorite happens to be Blackwater Park. However, this game has another major problem, and that is the online element. Hitman Absolution is split in two modes. One is the single-player story and the other is the contracts, a place where you can replay any level with different targets, outfits and loadouts. An extremely popular mode at one time, one responsible in many ways for Hitman Absolution sales to not just plunder after the official release. Well, after Square Enix and IO split in the middle of 2018, the servers were permanently shut down. That's half the gameplay experience erased forever. You can't even make contracts for yourself to play. It's a huge detriment to the game and a further showcase why so many gamers are so afraid of always online titles. It puts an expiration date on a game, and sadly Absolution has ran past it. However, don't let that discourage you from giving this game a try, if you find it at a fair price. There is enough good content here to keep you occupied and entertained for a while, especially if you're able to get through some of the bad elements of the story and replay your favorite levels afterwards. Outside of some generic locations, most of the levels are very unique, and it can be fun to explore the different methods of beating targets. Keep in mind, there are still some bugs that never got ironed out, like the HUD staying during the cutscenes, or having issues with the parkour movements when infiltrating buildings from the outside. However, there is enough meat to this game to have fun and give it a proper go. It's very different from the Hitman games of today, but once you get used to those differences, you can have fun with it. The production quality is certainly evident and can be worth it to loyal fans. Until next time, this has been Wild Gold, and thank you very much for watching.